Victoria Lang carefully adjusted her thick winter scarf as she stepped out onto the terrace of the snow-laden lodge. The crisp December air kissed her cheeks, sending a shiver down her spine, not entirely from the cold. 8 months pregnant, she felt the familiar flutter of her baby's movements, a delicate reminder of the life she carried, a life she longed to protect and nurture. She had envisioned this winter holiday as a time for peace, joy, and family warmth, a rare reprieve from the chaos of corporate obligations and city life. The snow glistened under the pale morning light, transforming the lodge into a picturesque winter wonderland, but Victoria could not shake the unease nesting in her chest. Her husband, Adrian Blackwell, CEO of a thriving investment firm, was already preoccupied. Though he smiled politely at the lodge staff and greeted her with a brief peck on the cheek, his eyes were distant, scanning the horizon, his phone clutched loosely in one hand. Every few minutes, he checked it, his brow furrowing as he read messages, making tiny gestures of agitation that were too subtle for anyone else to notice but unmistakable to Victoria. She felt a pang of disappointment. She had imagined that he would be fully present, that he would marvel at the falling snow, wrap her in warmth, and celebrate these last months before their child arrived. Instead, she was met with distraction, a silent partner who existed more in his device than beside her. During breakfast in the grand dining hall, Adrian's tone was curt, his attention half on her conversation and half on the glowing screen of his phone. Victoria's heart sank as she noticed the subtle signs, the way he avoided eye contact, how he pushed aside her hand when she reached for him, and the quick, almost dismissive responses when she asked about his day. She forced herself to smile, attributing his behavior to stress, but a knot of worry tightened in her stomach. Later, as the snowstorm began to gather outside, Victoria glimpsed him slip away for what she claimed was a work call, yet the hurried glances and whispered tones suggested something else. Little did she know, Adrian's thoughts were not on holiday planning or even her comfort, but on Bianca Sterling, a woman whose presence in his life threatened to shatter the fragile calm she tried to maintain. Victoria, sensing the growing tension but unaware of its full scope, focused on the flickering fireplace and the peaceful glow of the lodge, hoping against hope that her family would stay safe, warm, and intact despite the winter storm brewing both outside and within their marriage. Victoria sat by the grand window, the snowflakes swirling like tiny diamonds in the gray winter light, but her mind was far from the beauty outside. Adrian had slipped away again, another urgent call that kept him glued to his phone. She had noticed the pattern long before, late-night messages, hurried whispers, and cryptic texts that made her stomach twist with unease. Yesterday, she had spotted a small, elegantly wrapped box left on the sideboard in their suite. She picked it up, curious, only to find it contained a scarf that wasn't hers, paired with a card signed BS. Her chest tightened as the pieces began to align, each one confirming the betrayal she had quietly feared. Flashbacks tormented her, moments Adrian had missed, times when she had needed him the most. There was the day of her last ultrasound, when she had arrived excited to share the baby's first images, only to find Adrian called away for a last-minute business meeting. She remembered sitting alone in the car afterward, the cold air biting at her cheeks, wondering why he hadn't made her and their child a priority. Nights when she had been anxious about preterm labor or simple discomfort, and he had been dismissive, brushing her worries aside as hormones or stress. The stark contrast between these memories and his current indulgence with Bianca made her heart ache. As the lodge staff prepared for the winter gala, Victoria noticed Adrian's detachment more than ever. He hurried past her, distracted, leaving her to adjust the heavy winter coats and snow boots they would need for the evening. The chill of the room mirrored the growing distance between them, the layers of their relationship peeling away under the weight of deceit. She realized how vulnerable she truly was, not just to the cold but to the emotional abandonment that had been creeping into their lives. Each gesture, each ignored plea, and each secretive glance reinforced the truth: the man she trusted was choosing someone else over her, and now the winter coat she would need for warmth, her literal shield against the storm, was at risk of being taken away too, foreshadowing the heartache and danger that would soon strike in ways she could never have imagined. Bianca Sterling's presence in Adrian's life was a calculated storm, one that Victoria could feel approaching but could not yet fully see. Bianca was the picture of ambition and allure, with a charm so subtle it masked the sharp edge of her intentions. She knew Adrian's weaknesses, his vanity, his desire for admiration, and the restless longing for excitement beyond the confines of a domestic life. She positioned herself as the confidant he didn't know he needed, the antidote to boredom and the everyday responsibilities he found burdensome. Each meeting, each flirtatious smile, and each whispered suggestion was carefully crafted to make him feel indispensable to her, and to make her indispensable to him. Victoria noticed subtle changes first, the lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume, the odd crinkle of a note he tried to hide, the hurried explanations for his absences. She tried to dismiss them as overthinking, reminding herself that love and trust were foundations that should not be cracked by suspicion. Yet deep down, a cold certainty settled in her chest. Bianca was no casual distraction, she was methodical, patient, and relentless in her pursuit of Adrian's attention. Flashbacks flooded Victoria's mind, times when Adrian had cancelled prenatal appointments, dismissed her fatigue, or ignored her requests for emotional support. Each memory, once painful but manageable, now crystallized into a pattern of neglect that Bianca had exploited. Meanwhile, Bianca's tactics intensified. She would send subtle messages to Adrian during the day, masked as professional advice or friendly banter, each one designed to erode his emotional boundaries with Victoria. She exploited moments of weakness, his stress over business, his moments of doubt or insecurity, to weave herself seamlessly into his life. She even began suggesting coincidental meetings at the ski lodge, under the guise of business networking or social events, ensuring that Adrian's attention was increasingly diverted. Victoria's intuition tugged at her, a quiet alarm bell she couldn't ignore. She sensed danger lurking behind Adrian's distracted smiles and Bianca's calculated presence, but she lacked the full picture. The manipulation was sophisticated, invisible to anyone who wasn't paying absolute attention. Victoria's world, once stable and secure, now trembled on the edge of chaos. She remained unaware that Bianca's scheming would soon culminate in a cruel, public demonstration of betrayal, the taking of her winter coat, the literal and symbolic stripping of her safety, and the first step in a chain of events that would leave her exposed to the biting winter, both physically and emotionally. The crisp mountain air bit through the thin layers Victoria wore as she stepped onto the snow-covered terrace, excitement mingling with the nervous flutter of her unborn child. She had imagined this winter outing as a moment of joy, a chance to celebrate the season and feel the warmth of family. But the moment Adrian handed her the invitation to step outside, a cold unease settled over her. He approached with a charming smile, masking the calculation behind his actions, and draped a thick winter coat over his arm. "Here, Victoria," he said, his voice almost casual. "I'll take this to Bianca, she'll need it more than you right now." Her heart seized, a mix of shock, betrayal, and disbelief washing over her. The coat, her literal shield against the frigid December air, had been taken from her hands in a gesture that was anything but protective. Adrian's eyes avoided hers, filled with a strange mixture of guilt and arrogance, as if he believed the act justified his attention to Bianca's whims. Victoria's breath hitched, both from the cold and from the realization that the man she trusted could be so cruel. The snowflakes fell heavier now, clinging to her hair and settling on her shoulders, each icy touch a sharp reminder of Adrian's neglect. She tried to wrap her arms around herself, shivering violently, feeling the weight of her vulnerability pressing down with every gust of wind. The chill seeped into her bones, and even the warmth of her baby could not counter the bitter sting of betrayal. Around her, the festive event continued, laughing couples, families taking photos, the distant hum of holiday music, but Victoria felt isolated, unseen, and exposed. The humiliation cut deeper than the cold. It was a symbolic stripping of her dignity, a cruel message that Adrian's priorities lay elsewhere. She steadied herself against a railing, gripping it tightly as tears blurred her vision, the snow masking her sobs. In the distance, Bianca approached, smiling with triumph as if the winter coat were a trophy. Adrian handed it to her without hesitation, oblivious, or perhaps indifferent, to the damage left in his wake. Victoria's isolation was complete, the winter storm outside mirroring the storm within her heart. At that moment, she realized the depth of Adrian's selfishness, the extent of Bianca's influence, and the precariousness of her own safety, both emotional and physical. Every gust of icy wind whispered a cruel truth: she was utterly alone in that moment, and the man she loved had abandoned her for another. Victoria's legs trembled as the biting cold gnawed at her body, each step on the snow-covered terrace becoming heavier than the last. Her breaths came shallow and rapid, the weight of her advanced pregnancy amplifying every movement. The absence of her winter coat, taken by Adrian for Bianca, left her exposed, shivering violently in the unforgiving December chill. Panic began to claw at her chest, not just from the cold, but from the realization of her husband's callousness. Her vision blurred as icy flakes stuck to her eyelashes, and the world tilted unsteadily beneath her. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed into the powdery snow, the chill searing through her clothing. Bystanders gasped, rushing toward her, their faces etched with concern as they helped her sit up. Someone called for medical assistance, the urgency in their voices piercing the winter silence. In that moment, Victoria's body and spirit were overwhelmed, the betrayal, the exposure, and the fear coalescing into a sharp, relentless wave of vulnerability. Memories of Adrian's neglect surged unbidden. She recalled nights when he had prioritized work over her discomfort, skipped doctor appointments, and dismissed her emotional pleas. Every empty promise and cold dismissal echoed now, making the snow around her feel heavier, almost suffocating. She had trusted him, relied on him, and yet here she was, abandoned in the elements, a literal and symbolic representation of his disregard. Suddenly, a commanding presence approached, Charles Blackwell, Adrian's father. His eyes, sharp and furious, took in the scene, the snow-streaked, shivering woman, the panic of the onlookers, and the absence of his son's protection. "Adrian!" Charles's voice thundered over the crowd. His fury was palpable, a storm matching the winter around them. Confronting his son, he didn't mince words, condemning the reckless endangerment of both Victoria and the unborn child. Adrian's shame was immediate, his usual arrogance crumbling under his father's wrath. Charles's disapproval was not just emotional, it carried weight, authority, and the potential for irrevocable consequence. In front of witnesses and family, he pronounced his judgment, DISOWNED. The words hung heavy in the air, echoing like a gavel striking finality. For Victoria, relief mingled with lingering fear. Her father-in-law's intervention was a shield, protecting her and the baby from further harm, while Adrian's reckoning marked the beginning of the consequences he had long avoided. The wail of sirens cut through the winter air as paramedics arrived, their urgency and precision a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded moments before. Victoria, still trembling and weak from the snow and cold, was gently lifted onto a stretcher. Every touch of the medical team brought a mixture of relief and lingering shock, relief that help had arrived, shock at the sheer betrayal that had led her to this point. The biting chill that had gnawed at her body moments ago now seemed secondary to the ache in her heart. As the paramedics worked efficiently, wrapping her in thermal blankets and checking vital signs, Victoria's mind raced. She thought of Adrian, not in fear of his presence, but in disbelief at his selfishness. How could the man she had trusted, the father of her child, prioritize another woman over her safety and well-being? Each memory of neglect, each instance of emotional abandonment, now felt magnified, echoing painfully as her body shivered uncontrollably despite the warmth being provided. The physical danger she had endured mirrored the emotional peril she had long felt in her marriage. Charles Blackwell stood close, his presence steady and commanding. His eyes never left Victoria, a silent promise of protection and support. He held her hand as the paramedics stabilized her, whispering reassurances, ensuring she felt safe and cared for. Every stern glance he cast toward Adrian reinforced the gravity of the situation and the consequences awaiting a man who had so callously endangered his family. Victoria's reflections deepened as she lay under the blankets, the rhythm of medical equipment and the murmured instructions around her creating a strange calm. She realized that her vulnerability had not been a choice, it had been imposed upon her by Adrian's selfish actions. Yet, in the midst of fear and betrayal, she also recognized the power of support and accountability. Charles's intervention and the paramedics' swift care underscored that she was not alone. She had protection, she had agency, and she had a renewed resolve to safeguard herself and her unborn child, marking the beginning of a new chapter grounded in strength, resilience, and the acknowledgement of Adrian's failures. Victoria sat wrapped in the hospital blanket, the warmth contrasting sharply with the icy sting of betrayal that still clung to her heart. Her body was recovering from the cold, but her mind churned with a mix of shock, humiliation, and raw, unfiltered anger. She had trusted Adrian to protect her, to honor the bond of marriage, yet he had left her vulnerable, exposed to both physical danger and emotional devastation. Each shiver, each pang of memory from the snow-laden terrace, reminded her of the magnitude of his selfishness. As the initial shock faded, clarity emerged. She began to trace the threads of Adrian's behavior over the months, his late-night meetings, secretive phone calls, and the subtle ways he prioritized another woman over her well-being. What had once seemed like minor frustrations or oversights now revealed themselves as a consistent pattern of emotional neglect and manipulation. The realization cut deeply. This betrayal was not an isolated incident but part of a larger tapestry of disregard that had been woven into their marriage. Her anger, once raw and consuming, began to crystallize into resolve. Victoria recognized that she could not rely on Adrian for protection or support, not for herself and certainly not for her unborn child. The seed of independence took root within her, fueled by the necessity to create a safe, stable environment for the baby she carried. Every thought of Adrian's betrayal strengthened her determination to reclaim agency over her life. Victoria began quietly planning the steps she would take once she left the hospital. Legal counsel, financial independence, and a secure residence were no longer abstract concepts but urgent priorities. Her focus shifted from fear to strategy. She would protect her child, and she would ensure that Adrian's negligence could no longer dictate their lives. The humiliation she had endured in the snow, the sense of abandonment, and the anger toward Adrian became catalysts, forging a newfound strength and unwavering resolve. In the midst of trauma, Victoria's inner power emerged, marking the beginning of a journey toward autonomy, safety, and a life free from betrayal. Adrian paced the cold marble floors of his penthouse, the weight of realization pressing heavily upon him. The news of Victoria's collapse in the snow and the intervention of his father had sent shockwaves through his carefully constructed world. For the first time, he felt the sharp sting of consequence, not just the loss of trust, but the potential shattering of his family and reputation. Guilt gnawed relentlessly at him, each memory of neglect now magnified, missed doctor appointments, forgotten anniversaries, and nights spent in the company of Bianca, leaving Victoria alone and vulnerable. Flashbacks played vividly in his mind. He recalled Victoria smiling through the pain of advanced pregnancy, reaching out for emotional support he failed to provide. He remembered her quiet disappointment during cold breakfasts, her subtle pleas for attention drowned out by his obsession with ambition and the thrill of Bianca's manipulations. The avalanche of memories painted a stark picture. His choices had caused real harm, and the cost was more than he had ever anticipated. Adrian's fear intensified, fear of losing Victoria, fear of losing his unborn child's trust, and even fear of the social fallout that would accompany the revelation of his selfishness. In desperation, he reached for his phone, sending texts, calling, and leaving voice messages laden with apologies and pleas for forgiveness. He bought flowers, expensive gifts, and sent heartfelt notes in hopes of bridging the chasm he had created. Yet, each attempt met silence. Victoria's caution was evident. She had learned that words without action were hollow. The very messages that were meant to convey remorse only highlighted the emptiness of his past gestures. Charles Blackwell, ever vigilant, monitored these attempts closely. His stern gaze and unwavering standards for accountability left no room for deception or superficial remorse. He reminded Adrian that rebuilding trust required more than words. It required tangible, consistent action, responsibility, and genuine change. Adrian began to grasp that redemption was not immediate nor guaranteed. It was a long, painstaking path that demanded humility, sacrifice, and the acknowledgement of the pain he had inflicted. The first steps toward rebuilding were tentative, but they marked the beginning of a journey from selfishness to potential reconciliation, under the watchful eye of both Victoria and Charles. Victoria sat quietly in her sunlit apartment, the soft warmth a stark contrast to the biting cold of the night she had collapsed in the snow. She reflected on the months of turmoil, betrayal, and emotional neglect, understanding that the path forward required clarity and firm boundaries. For her and her unborn child, safety, both emotional and physical, was paramount. No longer could she allow Adrian's whims, manipulations, or lapses in judgment to dictate their lives. She meticulously outlined what she would accept: honesty, respect, and genuine involvement in their child's life, while maintaining her autonomy and control over her environment. Each boundary was a shield, a commitment to protect the vulnerable life she carried. Her decision was not born out of spite but from strength and foresight. Independence had become not just a concept but a necessity, ensuring that neither Adrian's past failures nor his potential missteps could jeopardize her child's well-being. Victoria acknowledged that trust must be earned, not assumed, and her measures reflected years of pain transformed into empowerment. Support came from unexpected yet steadfast places. Charles, her father-in-law, offered protection, guidance, and reassurance, demonstrating that family could still stand by her even as she navigated the aftermath of betrayal. Close friends rallied, providing emotional stability and practical assistance, reinforcing her resolve to build a secure, nurturing environment. Victoria focused on personal growth, rediscovering interests and passions that had been overshadowed by marriage and conflict. Each day became a step toward reclaiming her identity, balancing motherhood with self-empowerment. Meanwhile, Adrian's attempts at transformation were measured against consistent action rather than empty promises. Slowly, deliberately, he demonstrated his willingness to change, yet Victoria remained vigilant, aware that true redemption required time, patience, and unwavering consistency. In this careful reconstruction, Victoria found the strength to heal, to protect, and to envision a future built on trust, safety, and genuine care. Victoria arranged a private meeting with Bianca, determined to assert control and reclaim her dignity. The confrontation was poised yet firm, each word carefully chosen to communicate that manipulation, deceit, and intrusion into her family would no longer be tolerated. Bianca, accustomed to subtlety and control, found herself confronted by a woman whose strength had been forged through betrayal and hardship. Victoria made it clear that she was no longer a passive participant in her life or marriage. The lines were drawn, and Bianca's influence was permanently erased from their lives. Adrian, present during parts of the confrontation, witnessed firsthand the consequences of his choices. The emotional and moral reckoning was unavoidable. His affair, the neglect, and the chaos he had invited into their family were laid bare. Watching Victoria stand resolute, unyielding in her protection of herself and her unborn child, Adrian began to grasp the depth of his responsibility. The confrontation emphasized that reconciliation, if possible, would require unwavering honesty, accountability, and sustained effort on his part. With Bianca removed, Victoria turned her focus to the future. She considered the options before her: rebuild the marriage with strict boundaries and continued vigilance, or step away entirely to preserve her autonomy and peace of mind. Her priorities were clear: the well-being and safety of her child, her emotional health, and the restoration of self-respect that had been eroded by betrayal. Adrian understood that earning trust again would be a deliberate, consistent process. Words alone were insufficient, actions demonstrating genuine change were mandatory. Victoria's choice was not made impulsively but thoughtfully, weighing years of neglect against the potential for a healthier, more secure life. Whether they rebuilt together or apart, the focus remained on protection, healing, and the establishment of clear, unwavering boundaries that ensured the child's welfare and Victoria's empowerment.